Hi, I'm Andrew Meatrich, and today, May 13th, the United States is staring at the most expensive single budget request in its own history, and most Americans still cannot say what their country is actually fighting for. Let's walk through it carefully because the numbers stitch together a picture that the official statements keep trying to hide. We start at Capitol Hill, where Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth went in front of a House subcommittee and asked with a straight face for $1.5 trillion. Not for a decade, for the Pentagon this cycle. He framed it as restoration, as if the previous administration had quietly hollowed out the armed forces, and now, under President Trump, the country must rebuild on a wartime footing. Then his finance director, Josh Hurst, added a smaller, sharper figure. The war with Iran by itself has already cost $29 billion. $29 billion with no defined endpoint and no answer to what comes after. Hegseth said the Pentagon is, quote, ready for any development of events. That is the language of an institution that has stopped planning and started improvising. And improvisation on this scale is paid for with borrowed money. You can feel the same pressure 2 pages over in the Daily News. Republicans in the Senate just asked for an extra $1 billion in security spending, not for missile defense, for a new ballroom in Washington. Read that sentence twice. A war is bleeding the Treasury, gas stations are bleeding household budgets, and the response from one chamber of Congress is a $1 billion security bill for a ballroom. The disconnect is so loud it almost sounds like satire. It is not satire, and Americans noticed. Ipsos asked the country a single question. Has the president clearly explained what the United States is doing in Iran? 2 out of 3 said no. And here is the detail that should keep the White House awake. 1 in 3 Republicans also said no. This is not a partisan revolt. This is a coalition cracking from within. Trump's approval rating climbed slightly to 36%, up from a March bottom of 34%, and only 1 in 3 Americans believe the country is winning. That is the lowest support for a foreign war since the early months of the Iraq invasion in 2003. And Iraq, at least, came with a clear, if disputed, story. This one, 23 years later, has none. The story most Americans use to judge a presidency is told at the gas pump. Prices in the United States are rising every single day. Regular gas is now within 50 cents of Joe Biden's all-time high from the summer of 2022. Diesel is 18 cents away from its own record. 63% of Americans say their personal finances are already hurt. 3 out of 4, including half of Republicans, blame the Trump administration directly. 1 in 3 households is canceling summer plans or shortening trips. The president has floated suspending the federal fuel tax to ease the squeeze. Analysts have called the idea what it is, a patch over a burst pipe. The tax cut might shave a few cents off a gallon, while the underlying war that closed the Strait of Hormuz keeps pushing the wholesale price the other way. You cannot subsidize your way out of a logistics crisis you yourself created. Now the story turns darker and a little stranger. Trump walked into the Justice Department with a stack of newspaper articles about the Iran war, with a sticky note on top reading simply treason. He has demanded an investigation. The Justice Department obeyed. Subpoenas have already gone out to the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. Prosecutors are pulling phone and postal records. The trigger was a journal piece, published 5 days before the war began, in which senior officers warned the president of a long, draining conflict. The newspaper called this what it is, an attack on constitutionally protected journalism, and promised to resist. Set aside the politics for a second. When a president answers an inconvenient news story by criminalizing the reporters, he is admitting something about his own confidence in the facts. You do not subpoena the press when your numbers are good, and the numbers are not good. The financial squeeze on Iran tells us how nervous Washington really is. The Treasury just ordered American banks to flag every suspicious transaction tied to Iranian laundering networks. Newly created shell companies moving abnormally large sums. Chains of intermediaries, Iranian crypto firms, oil quietly relabeled as a Malaysian blend. Hong Kong, the Emirates, Oman, and several Chinese ports have all received quiet warnings about secondary sanctions. New sanctions hit a fresh batch of front companies that help Tehran sell oil to China through paper subsidiaries. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent calls it cutting Iran's financial oxygen. In practice, it is the United States admitting that $29 billion in direct combat spending was not enough, and now the second front has to be opened on the global banking system. When the world's largest economy starts policing every payment between Dubai and Shenzhen, that is not strength, that is exhaustion. There is one more detail from this week that I cannot stop thinking about. The Pentagon, for the first time anyone can remember, publicly disclosed the location of an Ohio-class nuclear submarine. The boat surfaced at Gibraltar, a British territory on the southern tip of Spain. These submarines are the most secret pieces of American hardware in active service. They are 1/3 of the entire nuclear triad. You do not announce where they are. You do not even confirm they exist on a given day. You announce them, on the rare occasion, only when you need other countries to remember they exist. The Pentagon called it a demonstration of capabilities and support for NATO allies. Translation: the Iran campaign is not going to plan, and Washington wants Tehran and Beijing and Moscow to see the gun resting quietly on the table. Tehran got the message and answered with one of its own. The press secretary of Iran's Parliamentary National Security Committee, Ibrahim Rezai, said publicly that any new American strike would push Iran to enrich uranium to weapons grade. 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium are still unaccounted for. American intelligence has been blunt. The Iranian nuclear program will remain a threat to the United States until that material is either destroyed or removed from the country. That is the real reason the war keeps stretching, week after week, instead of ending. The White House cannot declare victory, while the centrifuges or the uranium stockpile are still where they were before the bombs started falling. So the war continues, the meter keeps ticking, and the bill keeps growing in front of an audience that no longer wants to pay for it. And underneath every one of these stories, the structural picture that Alexander Radonsky pointed out this week. In 2000, 6 of America's 12 largest cities had Republican mayors, and 6 had Democrats. By May of 2026, only one of those 12 still has a Republican mayor. 11 are run by Democrats. Cities, suburbs, the engines of the economy, vote one way. The countryside votes the other. Most Senate Republicans now represent states with fewer people than a single New York metro area. The constitutional plumbing was designed for a country that no longer exists. The result is a system in which laws made by a rural minority govern a majority that lives in cities and pays the federal bills. This is the soil in which 36% approval, a $1.5 trillion Pentagon, and a $5 gallon of gas all grow at once. The political map and the financial map have drifted apart, and neither side has a plan for what happens when the gap finally tears. If you are watching this and you found the analysis useful, the single most useful thing you can do is hit like and leave a comment, even one sentence. YouTube's algorithm reads engagement, not opinion. A short comment from you is the difference between this video reaching a few hundred people and a few thousand. Subscribe if you have not yet, so the next breakdown lands in your feed when it matters. If you would like to go a step further, super thanks and channel sponsorship directly fund the hours of reading, cross-checking, and verification that this kind of independent reporting actually takes. Every dollar keeps this channel free of outside obligations and free to follow the story wherever it leads. Tell me in the comments where you think the next crack opens, the gas pump, the bond market, or the ballot box. Thank you for being here. I read every reply.